My father-in-law tried to kiss me and claimed I was leading him on. My husband almost believed him until he saw it for himself. The first time it happened, we were alone at the sink while everyone else was out in the yard. Nicodemus came up behind me while I was rinsing plates, put his hand flat on my lower back, and leaned in toward my face. I stepped back so fast I knocked a glass against the faucet, and I asked him what he thought he was doing. He said, "Don't act surprised. I know you feel it too. I love you. I have for a long time." I told him he was my husband's father and he needed to stop. He smiled at me like I had said something charming, said, "We'll talk about it when you're ready," and walked back out to the yard to carve the roast. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the hand, not the lean, the walking away, the complete confidence that nothing was going to come of it. I told Flynn that night. He went quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Are you sure you didn't misread it? He's a hugger, my dad." I said, "Your father told me he loves me and tried to put his mouth on mine. He said he would talk to him, and he did." And his father flipped the whole thing over in one move. He told Flynn, "She's been giving me looks all year. I thought she wanted it, and now she's scared her husband found out." So in a single sentence, I went from the woman it happened to into the woman who started it. Flynn came back to me with his face all torn up, not sure who to believe, and that was worse than anything Nicodemus did at that sink. Watching my husband try to split the difference between his wife and his father, Anita was worse than both of them. When it came up, she looked at me across her own dining table and said, "My husband would never. He's a family man. You should be careful making accusations like that. It could ruin this family." That fast. 4 years I had been in that family, and she decided I was a liar in under 10 seconds. For months after that, I was the problem. Not the man who put his hand on his son's wife. Me. The dinners kept happening because skipping them made me look guilty. And every single time, Nicodemus played the warm head of the household in front of everyone and found a reason to be near me the second nobody was looking. He would lean in by the coats and say, "You can drop the act, you know," or "Your husband doesn't appreciate you like I would." I would move away, and he would go right back to asking his nephews about work. He was calm about it because it kept working. Every time I pulled back or left a room, the family read it as me being cold and difficult, and he read it as a game we were both playing. Flynn kept saying, "Just get through dinner, we'll figure it out." But there was nothing to figure out as far as they were concerned, because his father had them all convinced I was either lying or leading him on. I started counting things I never used to count. Which relatives were still in the yard, how many steps it was from the sink to the back door, whether there was a child in the room, because a child in the room meant he would keep his hands to himself. I learned that if I carried something in both arms, he could not touch my back without making it obvious, so I carried things. Plates I did not need to move, a stack of napkins from one end of the house to the other. I made myself busy the way you do when the alternative is standing still in a place where standing still is not safe, and the family watched me do it and decided I was standoffish. That is the part nobody tells you. When a man like that has been running a family for 40 years, your own self-defense looks like rudeness to everyone else in the room. I tried one last time to make Flynn hear me. I said I did not feel safe in that house. He said, "He's my dad. I can't cut him off over a he said, she said." Nicodemus found out I had pushed it again and cornered me by the closet on the way out and said, "You keep stirring this up and you're the one who looks bad, not me." He was right, and he knew he was right, and that is why he never bothered to lower his voice much. Here is the thing my father-in-law could not do. He could not stop. He was so certain he was untouchable, so used to the whole family closing around him, that he got bolder instead of careful. At a birthday party for one of the grandkids, with the house packed, I went down the back hall toward the bathroom and he followed me. He put his hand on my arm, walked me backward into the wall and said, "I'm done waiting. Just admit it. You want this as much as I do." What he did not know was that Flynn had come looking for me down that same hall, and Hagar was 2 steps behind her brother. They came around the corner and saw all of it. His hand on my arm, me shoving at his chest, him leaning in. There was no story left about looks and games with his son and his daughter standing right there. He let go and started talking fast, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that we were just talking. Flynn asked him what kind of talking required pinning his wife against a wall. His father said, "You're making too much of this, come on." And then Hagar said, flat and clear, that she had heard the whole thing, including the part about wanting it as much as he did, because she had been standing there for it. That was what he could not spin. Not my word against his daughter's. The house full of relatives he had been performing for went completely quiet, and then it all came out at once, the way things do when a wall finally goes. Julio, a cousin on his side, said something in a low voice about a girlfriend somebody had brought to a holiday years back. Hagar said her own friend had felt uncomfortable around him once, and everyone had laughed it off. He had a history, and the family had spent years handing him the benefit of the doubt, and he had gone into that hallway fully expecting to get it again. He did not get it. But Anita was not crying over what her husband had done. She was watching me from across the room with a look I could not read, and when the house finally emptied out, she walked over and asked to speak with me alone. She was sitting on the edge of the bed in the back room, hands folded, spine straight, face tight in that way she gets when she is holding everything behind her teeth. She did not look angry. She looked rehearsed. I stayed standing by the door. She said, "I need you to understand something. Whatever you think you saw out there, that is not who my husband is. 42 years I have been married to that man. You have been in this family for 4. Like the arithmetic settled it." I braced for the same speech I had heard a dozen times, and then her voice cracked, just a hairline, and she said, "Do you think I didn't know?" I went still. She was not looking at me anymore. She was looking at her own hands, and she started listing things in a low, flat voice like she had been keeping the list somewhere for a very long time. The way he watched certain women at parties, the way he always had a reason to walk someone out to the garden or help someone find something in the garage, and it was always a younger woman, always somebody tied to the family through a boyfriend or a husband. She said, "I told myself it was nothing because he always came home." And then she straightened up, wiped her face with the back of her hand in one quick motion, like she was brushing off a bug, and said, "Which is why you need to let this go." There it was. She had not brought me in there to apologize. She had given me exactly enough honesty to make me feel like we were finally having a real moment, and then she used the moment to ask me to bury it. And I want to be honest about what that hour in the back room did to me, because for about 90 seconds I almost felt something for her. Not sympathy, something closer to recognition. Here was a woman who had been living in the same house as the truth for 4 decades, and had decided, every single morning, to walk past it like it was a piece of furniture. She had made that decision thousands of times. It had probably stopped feeling like a decision somewhere around year 10. And then she opened her mouth again, and I understood that the confession had never been a confession. It was currency. She had spent it on me to buy my silence, and she had expected the exchange rate to be fair, because in that family it always had been. She said, "He's an old man. He made a mistake. If you push this, you don't just destroy him. You destroy me. You destroy this family. You destroy Flynn's relationship with his father. Is that what you want?" I said, "You just told me you knew. You knew, and you let me walk into your dining room for months while everyone called me a liar." She said, "I was protecting my family." I said, "You were protecting him. There's a difference." She stood, smoothed her shirt like she was leaving a meeting, and said, "If you love my son, you will find a way to move past this quietly." I walked out. I did not slam anything. There was nothing left in that room for me. Flynn was waiting in the hall, and when I told him what his mother had just admitted, something closed behind his eyes that had been propped open for months. He said, "She knew?" I said yes. He sat down on the stairs and did not speak for a long time. The next morning, he called Anita to say we needed space from both his parents, and she said his father wanted one phone call. Just hear him out. He's your father. Flynn agreed to one. Nicodemus called that evening, and he was smooth as glass. He said, "Son, everyone got carried away. Your sister walked in at the wrong moment and heard something out of context. I was talking to your wife about a family matter and she got startled. That's all." He did not sound nervous. He sounded like a man clearing up a parking ticket. That was his whole gift. He never lied in a way that sounded like lying. He lied in a way that sounded like the only reasonable voice in a room full of emotional people. And I watched Flynn's face start to soften, not because he believed it, but because believing it would have been so much easier than the alternative. That voice had taught him to ride a bike. Then Nicodemus said, "Don't let one bad moment erase 30 years of being your father." And that was not a defense. That was a bill. He was putting the whole cost of the truth on his son's shoulders. And I noticed that he never once said the words, "Not I didn't do it. Not she's lying." He kept the sentence just vague enough that if Flynn ever pushed, there would be nothing on the record to push against. 40 years of practice will teach a man that much. You do not defend yourself against a charge nobody has formally made. You just keep talking in a warm voice until everyone gets tired and agrees the whole thing was unfortunate. Flynn was quiet for a long time. Too long. And then he said, "Dad, I saw you with your hand on her." His father came back without missing a beat. I was steadying her. She nearly tripped. "Ask her." I shook my head slowly so Flynn could see it. Flynn said, "Hagar heard what you said. The part about wanting it as much as you do." There was a pause on the line, 3 or 4 seconds, the kind where somebody has run out of road. Then Nicodemus said, "Hagar has always had it out for me. You know how she is." Hagar was sitting at the table 8 feet away with a cup of coffee she had not touched. Flynn did not say a word to her. He just reached over and tapped the speaker button and set the phone down on the counter. His father kept talking, filling the silence with his own version, not knowing the room had changed. I watched Hagar hear it. Her shoulders had been folded in all afternoon, and when her father's voice came through that speaker saying she had always had it out for him, her back went straight and her face went hard. Not hurt. Confirmed. She pushed her chair out and said, loud enough to carry, "Say that again, Dad. Tell me to my face I'm making it up." The line went dead. No goodbye. No last smooth sentence. He just hung up because his entire system ran on people not being in the room when he talked about them, on getting to one person before another could correct the record, and Flynn had taken that away from him with one button. What stayed with me that night was not the win. It was Hagar's face afterward. She said, "I needed to know what he says about me when I'm not there." And then, quieter, almost to herself, he didn't even hesitate. 2 days later, Julio called, and Flynn put him on speaker without being asked, because we were done having conversations only one of us could hear. Julio said, "I should have said more at that party. There's stuff this family doesn't talk about." He came over that evening and sat down at the table and put both hands flat on it like he needed something solid under him. He said about 8 years ago somebody brought a girlfriend to a holiday dinner. A young woman, 23 or so, shy, sticking close to her boyfriend because she did not know anybody. Nicodemus zeroed in on her early, kept finding reasons to talk to her, kept standing a half step too close. Later that night, Julio walked past a back room and the door was almost shut, but not all the way, and Nicodemus had her over by the window, talking low, and her arms were crossed and she was leaning away from him the way you do when you are trying to make yourself smaller. Julio said he did not go in. He told himself it was probably nothing, and he went back and got another drink. She told her boyfriend that night. The boyfriend brought it to the family. Nicodemus said she had misunderstood him, that he was just being welcoming, and then Anita got involved. Julio looked right at Flynn for this part. He said, "Your mom called that boy's mother and told her the girl was dramatic and looking for attention." He let it sit. Then he said, "She got called a liar by this family. They broke up a few months later. She disappeared, and nobody ever asked why." I was 22. I've thought about it every year since. Nobody in that room moved. Flynn sat with his hands over his mouth, staring at nothing, watching the same story run twice in his head. I asked Julio if there were others. He rubbed his jaw and said he could not give me names. Then he leaned forward and said, "But the pattern is always the same. He picks someone tied to the family through a partner, someone who has something to lose by speaking up. Never a stranger who can just walk away clean. And then the family closes ranks." He said it like he was describing a machine, and that was exactly what it was. Nicodemus never went after women with nothing to lose. He went after women with everything to lose, because he knew the family would do the work for him. All he had to do was deny it once. They would protect him not because they believed he was innocent, but because believing he was guilty cost the holidays and the photos and the whole story they told themselves about who they were. Nobody wanted to pay that, so they made the woman pay it instead. Up until Julio said it out loud, I had been carrying this like a private crisis between me and one man. It was not private. It was a system, and it had been running longer than I had been alive in that family, and I was only still standing because Flynn and Hagar happened to turn down that hallway at the right 10 seconds. Flynn asked Julio if he would say all of that in front of Anita. Julio did not hesitate for even a beat. He said, "I'll say it in front of anyone. I should have said it years ago." Hagar sat up then and said she wanted to talk to her mother without her father there, and she wanted it to come from her and Flynn, not from me. She said, "If it's only coming from her, Mom will find a way to make her the villain again. She'll say your wife turned us against her. But if it's me and Flynn and Julio at that table, she can try, and she'll fail." So I stayed home, not because I was afraid, and not because I did not have the right to be there, because convincing Anita Anita was never going to happen, and was never the point. The point was making a record, so that she could never again look anybody in the eye and say nobody told her. The morning of it, Anita called Flynn first, and he put her on speaker. Her voice came through tight and careful. She said, "Your father is in a very dark place. He barely slept. If you push this further, it could break him. He's not a young man. If something happens to him because of this, that's on all of you. All of you, her own children." I watched the guilt land on Flynn in real time, because it does not matter how old you are or how right you are. When your mother says your father might break, some kid-sized part of you wants to stop everything and fix it. He said he would call her back and hung up and stood at the counter saying nothing. Hagar came in the back door, heard what happened, set her bag down and said, "She's making us responsible for his feelings, so we stop holding him responsible for his actions." Flat, not even angry, like she was reading a label she had read 100 times. She said, "If Dad's in a dark place, he put himself there." Flynn picked up his keys. I sat on the couch with my phone face up on my knee for 2.5 hours, and did not read a single thing on it. That waiting was its own kind of work. For months, I had been the one in the room, the one making the case, the one looking that woman in the face while she called me a liar in her own dining room, and now I was outside of it, and I had to trust that two people who had spent 30 years being managed by their father would hold the line without me there to hold it for them. I kept telling myself it did not matter what Anita said, and it did not really. But some part of me was still waiting to be believed by the last person who refused to do it. They told me everything that night, the two of them filling in each other's gaps until I could see it. Anita had the table set like a Sunday visit. Coffee in the middle, pastries from the good bakery, cloth napkins, the white cups with the thin rims she only brought out when she needed things to feel a certain way. She hugged Hagar like nothing had happened. She asked Julio about his drive. Nobody touched a pastry, nobody picked up a cup. Finally, Flynn said, "Mom, sit down. We need to talk about Dad." She sat, folded her hands, and said, "I already apologized to your wife. I told her I was sorry she felt uncomfortable. What more do you want?" That was the rewrite. She had not apologized. She had told me to keep quiet. Hagar said so out loud, and Anita's chin came up and she said, "I told her to think about this family," which is more than she's done. Even then, even with me not in the building, she found a way to make it about me. So Julio told the story again, the whole thing, laid out next to the untouched pastries. Anita's face went tight while he talked. "Not surprised," Hagar said. Tight, like someone hearing a thing she had hoped was buried. When he finished, she said, "That was a misunderstanding. That girl was troubled." The same script, 8 years later, word for word. Julio said, "You called her dramatic. You told her boyfriend's mother she was looking for attention. And then she disappeared and nobody asked why." Anita looked at the table, at her own hands. Hagar said her mother's hands were shaking and her lips were pressed white, and for a second it looked like the whole thing might crack open. Then she straightened up and said, "Your father has given everything to this family, and this is how you repay him? By ganging up on him with some girl he barely knows? Some girl. 4 years of birthdays and dishes and holding my tongue, and I was still just some girl." Hagar said that was the moment something snapped in her chest. She said, "That some girl is Flynn's wife, and Dad cornered her in a hallway and told her she wanted it. I heard it with my own ears. Are you calling me a liar too?" Anita did not answer. She sat there and let the silence be her answer, because yes meant losing her daughter, and no meant losing the only version of her life she knew how to live. Then Flynn said, "Mom, I'm not asking you to choose between me and Dad. I'm telling you what's going to happen. No more dinners, no holidays, no gatherings where his father was present. If she wanted us, it would be on our terms and separate from him. And then, if you try to make my wife the villain one more time, you won't just lose her, you'll lose me." Hagar stood up beside her brother and said, "Me too. I love you, Mom, but I watched you spend months treating her like the problem while Dad walked around this house like he owned everyone in it." Julio just nodded. Anita was alone on her side of that table with the cold coffee and the folded napkins and nobody standing with her, and her face came apart. It was not an apology. Hagar was clear about that. What she said was, "I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make it stop without losing everything." Flynn said, "You could have believed her. That's all you had to do." She covered her face with her hands, and one by one they got up and left. He came home an hour later and found me on the porch with tea I had let go cold. He sat down close enough that our shoulders touched and told me all of it, and then he said, "I should have believed you the first time. I'm sorry it took this long." I did not tell him it was okay, because it was not okay. I said, "It did take too long." He nodded and said, "I know," and did not try to make it smaller, and that was the part that mattered. Down the street, a neighbor's porch light clicked on over an empty driveway. The tea had gone cold in my hands.